Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HPL Gallery's Artist Talk series. My name is Jennifer, and today I am so thrilled to introduce to you artist Coulter Fussell. Coulter is an artist that primarily works with textiles, and her pieces fall into the category of quilts, but she explores the form in a way that memorializes the tradition of quilting, but also challenges the subtle dynamics that the tradition of quilting reinforces. So with that, I'll leave it there and turn it over to Coulter to further introduce herself and to share her work with us. Thank you so much today for doing this, Coulter. How are you?
I'm good. And thank y'all for having me do this or asking me to do this. I appreciate it. Hello to everyone in Beaver Public Library Galleries land. I'm happy to be here. And just as an introduction, I think, I guess a lot of y'all probably in Birmingham. I'm from Columbus, Georgia, which is West Central Georgia. Y'all probably heard of it. It is right across the river from Phoenix City, Alabama. So I'm real close to Alabama, where I'm born and raised. And a lot of my work has to do with where I'm from. So, there's an Alabama aspect to the work that I do. I'm going to share my screen with y'all of my website and then start to tell y'all sort of how I started and what I do. Okay. So we're at my website, and it's going to start with a bunch of pictures of fabric, random t-shirts and clothes, because this is the material that I use. I learned to quilt from watching my mother, who's a traditional quilter, or was a traditional quilter. She's not anymore. She's really advanced and moved on. Her name is Fussell from Columbus, Georgia. But she, growing up watching her my whole life, sort of knew the process of quilting. I knew what steps it took, and, I knew how to make a quilt just by watching her do it. I couldn't have necessarily sat down and made a quilt myself. For one, it's pretty complicated. And for two, I wasn't like blessed with the gene of like precision, attention to detail and precision that makes that traditional quilt work so incredible and wonderful and admirable. So instead, as a child, I was really interested in drawing and painting. And my father worked as a museum curator in Columbus, Georgia. And so sort of in retrospect, I see that my lack of being like exact and precise with things was sort of filled with this sort of like whimsical, like painting technique that I was seeing in the museums. And so later on, as a textile person, all that sort of melded together. My like love of contemporary painting along with my love of traditional craft work. And it sort of all came together and mashed up. And, so what we have is these quilts that are sort of born at the same place and at the same time with these two elements, quilts/paintings with these two elements in mind. I live in Water Valley, Mississippi, which is this small town in North Mississippi. And I have a storefront. My studio is a storefront. And on the storefront, people drop by donations. They drop off, like clothes and curtains, sheets, pillowcases. And I take all of that material and make quilts with them. And as you can see, as we scroll through the website, everything from like mink and fur to old quilts that have been cut and upholstered to fit a chair, old t-shirts, rags. I cut it all up and make these quilt works. Some of these old quilts go back to the 1860s. And some of the material is t-shirts that I had when I was a kid. Those Rubik's Cubes are off a t-shirt I had when I was a kid. The t-shirt actually said Cubists do it faster. I thought they were talking about painters. It's about Rubik's Cube. I was such an art nerd. And then we have like old meal sacks from Columbus, Georgia, these old misprinted rice bags. So I use whatever in the world people bring me. When I first started making quilts out of this old material that people would bring, I thought that about 70%, I thought that about 20% of the donations they sent me were good, you know. And most of the stuff I was like throwing away. I was like, oh, this is unusual. This is some like cheap t-shirt made, you know, and wherever. This isn't some like fine wool or linen from, you know. Well, over the course of the years, I was like starting to use more and more donations. And I was like, God, these donations are getting so much better. Like now I use almost everything people send me. People are sending me such better stuff. And then, you know, I realized it wasn't that the donations, they were not getting any better at all. What I was valuing was changing. So the act of them donating and what they were bringing to me was changing the artist, you know. What was coming to me was changing in my mind how I valued what was around me, really. So this quilt on the left here, for instance, with the bright sort of pink diamonds in that sort of cube form. That quilt was originally found in the dump. I went out, took the truck out to the city or the town county landfill to dump some trash, and there were two really old quilts just laying on top of the trash. And so I got two of them, and this is one, and I sort of deconstructed it, I guess. I took some of the batting off. I stamped some like a flying geese pattern on there with paint. I added some, you know, applique of these other traditional designs to it. This was the first piece where I really started to take stuff apart and really sort of dig into the literal inside of the quilt and sort of start to expose on the outside what quilters go through great effort to hide. You know, quilts are really made from the inside out. We sew the seams backwards. We turn them over, and everything's hidden on the inside so that the outside is pristine. And so part of what I do is take what's on the inside and turn it outside. So you can see what we've done. You can see the effort, you know, the steps and the stages and the effort we've gone through. This piece, and I take that element of quilting and then combine it with these really hyper personal stories of my own. This piece is called Sky Zone, and there was a time when me and my two sons we had no money at all, and I would sell a quilt, and they would want me to take them to Sky Zone, which was this trampoline park in Memphis. And it was like, to them, it was like Disneyland, you know. They're like, take me to Sky Zone. And when you go to Sky Zone, you get these really bright orange socks to wear because it's like a trampoline park. And so my house was for like 2 years littered with these little bright orange socks of my children's from our trips to Sky Zone when I would sell a quilt and take them as a treat. And so this piece is sort of dedicated to that time period with this like super bright orange fluorescent. The stripes there is my Uncle Guy's work shirt. That's batting that would normally go inside of a quilt on the outside. From the same time period, this piece is just titled Money. And it's got material that's been dyed in sumac berries that I found around here, and some old vintage curtains from Curvin's department store in Columbus, Georgia, this old famous department store that lots of old Columbuscites know about. This is another piece having to do with the Chattahoochee Valley, where I'm from. Those are meal sacks from Columbus. On the bottom right down there is my mom's biscuit making pillowcase, where she rolls the biscuits, and you can still see like the spot where she pushes them down and the flour around them. I used, in this detail shot, there's starch, hand painting. I did that ink on there. So there's all sorts of like really sort of small details in this work. Some of it's there already. Some of it was there, and I bring it back. In this picture, the striped material to the left, I could see the old quilting lines from the original quilter that came off of a quilt. I could see the old needle punctures where she had done it. There was no longer thread in there. It was an old piece of fabric. So I just re-sewed exactly through the holes where she had sewn before. So that is exactly what that woman, whoever she was, did. So I just brought it back. I do that fairly often. If I ever see that, which is a lot, I redo their stitches. Same thing through the batting there. See those stripes on the white batting? That's also someone's old quilting lines. So this is, that's my father's drop cloth with the staining there. So that work's a few years old. And then sort of in line with that, the next big thing I did was my work for the Halsey Institute in Charleston. This show was called The Raw Materials of Escape. And it's along the same sort of lines where I took the donations that were given to me along with old fabric I had, and what I deciphered sort of the clues of these textiles to be, mixing that with my own personal experience. This piece is called Peaceable Kingdom. It's titled after the old Edward Hicks paintings with, the idyllic animals on the landscape. So this is sort of about finding a world, or making your world a peaceful place amidst like chaos. In this piece, you can see that I incorporate a lot of my children's drawings. Those are my kids' drawings down there in the middle. I have 2 boys. So there's like nachos and tacos and guns, basketballs, I often get my children to draw on fabric for me to include in my pieces, not only because I want them to feel a part of this thing that I spend a whole lot of time doing, but because I really like to have that sort of masculine element in what is considered and is such women's work. And also in this piece, you can see to the left there, I have a whole entire printed pattern written out to make that rabbit. And I love pattern directions. I like to include them in pieces. The very top of the quilt is my mother's second quilt she ever made, which is pretty incredible. She made a double wedding ring when she was like 19 years old, and it's that good. And so the whole top of the quilt is my mother's piece. So this is a 3-generational quilt. Probably more, because there's no telling who all else sewed stuff in there. I mean, the black and white pieces on the bottom, who knows how old she is. There's all sorts of stuff in there. In this piece, Wash Rag, that was a wash rag that came into the studio. The backing quilt with the red going down it, that was inside another quilt. Often I'll get old quilts and the batting is just another old quilt because they've, sewn over it. They needed batting and they used the old quilt. And I think that's a very, very old quilt there. It's one of the oldest that I've ever found. So a lot of times when I get a quilt donation, it's really like a 2-fer or a 3-fer. Like I won't get one quilt. I'll get that quilt and the one inside it and then the one inside that one. In this one, I've grafted a bear to it, a teddy bear. I sort of wanted the bear and the quilt to look like they were coming from the same place at the same time. We joke that it looks like the Kool-Aid man busting through the Kool-Aid wall. This piece is called Our Rooms. It's about home and housing. That's the big sort of amoeba-shaped pink, purple comforter on top came to me shaped just like that. So oftentimes I'll get something that's sort of stuck in a fold because it's been under a pile of something for many years. And so the folds are kind of set temporarily. And so I just sew them down as they are. Sort of a like homage to like that materials. Like, why did they wind up like that? Why were they there? Why were they there so long in that way? So I keep that material's history there by just sewing it down exactly as is. Let me find y'all another one. That's an old Alabama quilt called Bear Claw. And, a red and white quilt is sort of a traditional quilting thing. It's sort of a sure shot. You can't go wrong with a red and white quilt. So I wanted to make one. And so I basically took all the red and white materials in my studio, put them on one quilt. This one's called The Raw Material of Escape, which is what the show was named after. The bottom part was from an old quilt that had been reshaped to cover a chair, So somebody had used the quilt so long it was no longer bedworthy, but they still needed it to cover their chair, and it wound up taking this real strange form. The middle part that's lavender is a piece of fabric that did not have any stitching left in it, but you could tell the piece of fabric had been in a flood and then left to sit, and those brown lines were where the dirty water had set and stained between the rows, the quilting rows. So I could still tell the original quilter's quilting pattern just by following the staining pattern of when the quilt had been flooded. So that was really cool. This piece is about voyeurism, either, being watched, like feeling like, eyes in the sky. The top part of this piece is an 1880s Victorian crazy quilt from Buena Vista, Georgia. This is a quilt about florals. I wanted to make a floral piece, and so I took basically every floral fabric in my entire studio and just sort of had at it. All that you can't tell in these photographs necessarily, but all these quilts are quilt size. They're all, 8 and 9 feet tall. This quilt is called The Numbers, and it's about chance and how you sort of, sometimes you just wind up on the wrong side of luck, and because the numbers require that somebody has to be there because things aren't 100% all the time. And so this piece is about sort of either being on the good or the bad side of the numbers. That comes up a lot in my work. Now I'll go real quick to what I've been working on more recently this year. Here's a piece here's a show called The Midway at Southside Gallery in Oxford, Mississippi. And what I've been doing here is taking the idea of handmade and machine made and hand making machines in hand methods, like what you would use, a hand method you would normally use to make a traditional quilt without a machine. I take those methods and make a mechanical machine. So the pieces move and they spin and they're hand sewn. I made that with like some knitting needles as the spin mechanism. I also incorporate other people's canvases. This is an artist friend of mine here in Water Valley donated an old canvas he had cut up. And so that yellow streak there, that area is his. There's a target on there that's my child's target shot. This piece is called My First Bet Against the Company, and it's about that, like betting against the thing that isn't really doing you right. This is the piece I started to make pieces be sort of layered. The front comes out from the back. Because, a quilt is layered. It's 3 layers. And I started to sort of separate those layers so that you could see. This piece is called Arm & Hammer. After that, soap, the Arm & Hammer soap. And real quickly, what I'm doing now, the River Raft Quilt series, these are conceptual quilted river rafts that are supposed to take someone on a conceptual journey of escape down a river. And in my case, it's the Chattahoochee River, where I was born and raised, which is obviously the border between Georgia and Alabama. And so then here we have a chenille bedspread that me and my son slept under till it just fell apart, star quilts, and fitted sheets. I like to use fitted sheets in these pieces as like trying to sort of conform the unconformable. Here we have a river raft that has a net built in for if you catch fish on your journey. The little crocheted doilies came into the studio. Those could act as fish scales. There's a little box there, keepsake for the children's toys to keep them dry on your journey. Another reference to voyeurism with the eyes. These wooden round pieces occur often in this series, and they're an allusion to tunnels. You can escape your raft through this tunnel that goes down to the bottom of the river, and that is about the sort of mythology of Phoenix City, Alabama, in the 50s when they would raid the gambling joints. There was the myth that the owners of the gambling joints would pull a lever and the slot machines would slide down into the bottom of the Chattahoochee River. So I grew up with this idea of like these, escape tunnels. So, and this is, I think this might be the last 2 pieces of my latest work. There's another escape tunnel and another sort of like fitted sheet that's supposed to, emulate like an inflated raft. And we got biscuit cutters on that one, real old ones. And then another one that's supposed to, sort of emulate water and sort of riding a tide, crest and trough. So that's sort of the latest work I'm doing now is the River Raft series. So I think that's it.
I can jump in. I had a question for you.
Okay.
There's one particular line in your statement that struck me. If the fabric was connected to a human life, then it is as sacred as the next. Mm-hmm. And I think this line has a lot to do with the materiality of your work. And I'm wondering if you would talk about that a little bit. I think you kind of started to in the beginning, but just to expand on it a little bit.
Well, I mean, every fabric that I get is connected to human life, and it is, no fabric is more sort of sacred than the next because no human life is more sacred than the next. And so, there can be like a real worshiping of like nice fabrics, and then there can also be, in my case, like the worshiping of the story of the fabric. I'm much more interested in what's behind the fabric than what the fabric actually is. Like if it can be a Walmart t-shirt bought yesterday, and the fact that it winds up at my studio door, the process that took it to get there, to get to the donation bag, that's really what I'm interested in. I mean, that and like at the end of the day, color, and texture, because I'm a visual artist, but like, it really has to do with the human story behind it. And the story doesn't even have to be necessarily interesting, because, a lot of our day-to-day is mundane, but I'm interested in that, because, when it comes to domestic craft, what I see, what we do is considered mundane a lot of the time. It's overlooked. it's, you know, presumed to always be there. It's undervalued and underappreciated. And I'm really interested in sort of the everyday of people's lives and the textiles of that.
Well, I think that that's interesting. You know, you're interested in the longevity of the piece and extending its life, you know, and kind of continuing the spiral that it's in.
Yeah.
You know, and it exists, you know, now outside of its original intention and is like memorialized and archived through your work, you know. And
Yeah,
we can see the lifespan of the piece, I think, more clearly too,
yeah.
because you're accentuating it.
Yeah, I always feel like sort of, you know, like faded when the fabric comes to my door. I'm like, well, you get another 30 years, you know, because you were about to go in the garbage, you know, and or however long my piece lasts, who knows. But yeah, I always feel like, you know, getting the privilege of being able to like expand the usage of something is really great. So.
Okay. Let me see if I can stop our screen share.
Do I need to?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's easier for you. All right. Well, Coulter, that was like so exciting. I really, really enjoyed your talk and hearing about your process and everything. So,
well, sorry if I rambled.
No, not at all, not at all. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to share your work and to hear you talk about it. It was really great.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on this. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll say farewell. Have a good day.
All right, thanks.